Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be going through a list of incredibly fast-paced, action-packed, page-turner adult fantasy. The kinds of books that you do not want to put down, you don't want to go back to your everyday life, you just want to fly through these books. And I will have a companion video to this where I discuss books that are essentially the opposite, where you don't want to fly through them because you don't want them to be over. You just want to be lost in the world, you want to see the development of the characters, you want to be pulled in by the intrigue. And both types of stories, I think, appeal to a different kind of reader, and they also are a testament to very good pacing, just different kinds of pacing. But like I said, today we're focusing on the fast-paced books, and I'm going to kick it off with Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. This one is a little bit of a booktube darling, so I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the premise, but a lot of people when they speak about this one speak about the magic system because it really is really innovative and very cool. So the setup for the magic is that you can code objects to believe that their reality is different than it is, and thus you can command objects to do things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do or would require a human being to man them. So an example that's given at the very beginning is that you can code a wheel to believe that the wind is blowing and thus the wheel is turning, and that makes it so that you can have carts that do not necessarily require an active driver at all times. Things like that. So it plays an integral part of the world, which I always really like to see in fantasy stories when the magic has so clearly had an impact on how everybody's lives function. But our main character, Sanchia, is somebody who ends up finding herself possessing an item that goes against the in-world rules and limitations. And as a result, there are some very powerful people that want this object any cost. And so suddenly Sanchia finds that she has a target on her back. This also has a trope a lot of people really like, which is the sentient object. It's something you see in books like Warbreaker with Nightblood, the object that seems to be able to communicate with its wielder or with its companion or just with people in general. So if you like that trope, you're definitely probably going to want to check out Foundryside. I will say this one leans more on the younger side of adult fantasy, and if you like that slightly more youthful, fun feel, then that's another reason why Foundryside might work for you. After that, we have a book that I very much enjoyed. It took me a little bit to get into, and that would be The Art of Prophecy. The only reason I say this one took me a little bit to get into is it's quite campy, and I wasn't expecting that when I first started it, but once I was like, oh, okay, that's the tone of this book, then I had such a blast with it. I have consistently described it as basically a Jackie Chan movie in book form. The martial arts, the way they're written into the story, are so fun. They're so visual, and I can be pretty picky with action scenes. I think a lot of us can be. We don't want things to be too descriptive because it can kind of actually make the pacing of the action suffer. But this, it's just, like I said, you can visualize everything, you can feel it. When the characters get hit, it feels like you're getting hit, and it's just done so well. And the setup for this one, speaking of tropes, you take the mentor-mentee relationship as well as the chosen one, and you start out thinking it's going to be generic. You have this chosen one who, because they're the chosen one, everybody pampers them, protects them, because they think we have to ensure the safety of this person so that someday when the big bad comes through, this person can save us. However, because they pamper this individual, they are not prepared whatsoever for any kind of threat. And then Q, the mentor figure who comes into the picture, recognizes how pretty much useless this kid is, and she thinks, I need to teach them how to fight, or we're all gonna die when the prophecy comes to be. And so she takes it upon herself to teach him, and then, like I said, you think it's gonna just be generic, oh, they're gonna teach them how to fight, and then they're gonna get stronger, but then a lot of other stuff comes into play, and you don't really know where the book's gonna go, but it takes a lot of fun twists and turns, and it keeps you on your toes, which I really liked. I had so much fun with this one, so definitely highly recommend, especially if you like really well done action scenes. After that, we have one that it's a fantasy standalone, and it technically is kind of in the middle of this author's world, but you can read it by itself, and if you have read the trilogy that comes first, then you're already set to go, and that would be Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. If you have not read the First Law trilogy, you don't technically have to pick this one up. It's just there's going to be some appearances that the characters aren't necessarily named, but if you've read the first 3 books, then you're like, oh, I know who those people are. And if you haven't, then you just don't really know who those people are. And that's fine. It's not going to impact the story. Overall, this is just a revenge story. And a lot of people find that revenge stories have very much a been there, done that feel to them. But this one, I think, does revenge stories just perfectly, where you're rooting for the character, you're seeing very much is the end goal really worth what it takes to get there? Are you compromising your own morality? And in some ways, the main character of this is like, I know I have questionable morals, I'm gonna do this anyway. And so it kind of makes it so that it's a little different. You're not really watching them suffer and really think through like, oh, what am I doing? You don't have that, and it kind of makes it a little bit more fun, to put it sort of bleakly. But she wants revenge after she is stabbed in the back, pretty much literally right from the beginning. And it also resulted, this inciting incident at the beginning, in somebody that she cares about being hurt. And so she is dedicated to getting revenge, and she's also dedicated to getting the power and the financial means to get this revenge and to make the connections that she needs to make. So you do get introduced to some other characters, all of whom have very questionable morals, which is kind of on brand for an Abercrombie book. If you've read the trilogy, you know that that's pretty par for the course here. And I will say a lot of people have a hard time getting into First Law because it's so meandering and it feels so plotless for so long. So if that's you, if you struggled getting into First Law, don't worry. I did too. It took a little bit, but Best Served Cold just flies. It feels so odd to say I had a lot of fun with it because it's so violent, but it was really fun. It's probably the most fun I've had with an Abercrombie book, so definitely highly recommend that one. After that, we have a couple that they're on the shorter side. Some of the other ones we've talked about are a little bit longer, and that would be the Queens of Renthia series, and then also Second Era Mistborn. I know that unlike First Law with Best Served Cold, you pretty much want to read the first Era Mistborn books before picking up Second Era, but I still wanted to include these because they really are really fast-paced. They're really fun. They have very much this sort of detective feel to them initially, and then the stakes build with each book. Whereas I feel like a lot of fantasy, especially a lot of epic fantasy and high fantasy, they start out huge and it takes time to get accustomed to everything, and then it starts to move. Whereas Second Era Mistborn, just right from the start, it flies by, and I quite enjoyed the pacing of these. I find that a lot of the characters are a little bit happy-go-lucky, or they have a little bit more charm to them than you're going to find in First Era. So if you haven't read First Era, I do recommend reading it first. But if you have, you'll know that First Era can be kind of doom and gloom. Cool, but it's not as fun. And fun is just the perfect way, I think, to describe Second Era Mistborn. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have stakes, because it definitely does. And then with the Queens of Renthia series, you will see, just read the opening if you have a means of being able to read a sample online. If you read the prologue, the opening chapter, I'm not sure if it's just a chapter 1 or prologue, but the opening, read it and then see for yourself if you're gripped by that start, because it really gets going right away. It's quite short. The whole trilogy, all of the books are quite short. And this one I have seen shelved as young adult and I've seen shelved as adult. So I definitely think it's very accessible. And the setup is that there is this amazing setting where these people live in the forest, and they primarily live in the treetops because the forest floor can be quite dangerous. And within this forest are these beings that are called spirits. And the spirits very much want to harm humans because their main purpose in life is to protect the forest, and by human beings living within it, they inevitably harm the forest. And the only way to keep these spirits in check and keep them from slaughtering all of mankind is to have a magic user that sort of holds them all in place. And what can be very dangerous is when this magic user someday passes away, there needs to be somebody ready immediately so that the spirits do not harm a lot of people. Also, as the magic user starts to lose their powers, starts to age or grow ill, they can start to lose their hold on the spirits. And at the very beginning, you see what happens when this hold becomes weakened. And our main character happens to witness all of this, and from that point on, she's determined to go to the magic school to see if she can become strong enough to someday potentially become the queen, basically, and be the person that has all of this magic to hold the spirits in check. How many times am I saying hold the spirits in check? A lot, probably too many. But anyway, it moves very quickly, even though you might hear magic setting and think school, we're going to have the character go to these classes. You do go through a lot of the character's life, so in that way, it feels like it would be a little bit slower going, but actually it moves through it quite fast, and it's quite plot driven. I tend to be more of a character driven reader, but with this one, the setting is just so phenomenal that I was really quite blown away by it, and I had so much fun being in this world and then seeing the danger that all the characters had to try and avoid. After that, we have a couple books that I actually think I would compare to one another as far as the setup and a lot of how much action you get, and that would be Combat Codes and Rage of Dragons. So both of these have characters that are basically leveling up throughout the story. So if you like that kind of grind, if you like watching a character that is consistently trying to improve their fighting prowess, their strength, their endurance, then I would definitely check out both of these. They're a little different from each other in how the main characters behave. I much preferred the main characters in Combat Codes, and also I liked the mentor-mentee relationship. So the setup for this one is that you have a young boy named Seago who is in these fighting pits. He doesn't really remember how he got here. And you find the other character who is an adult and an older man is starting to see this boy in the fighting pits, and he wants to find a way to pull him from that and then train him in a way that is much less brutal. With Rage of Dragons, you have a character who, at the very beginning, due to the way that their society is broken up and they're a part of a lower class, they are very much oppressed and stomped on, and someone they care about is harmed as a result, and they want revenge, and so now they are doing everything they can to, as I described before, level up, get as strong as possible, so that they can try to bring justice to those who deserve it. Next up, we have Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. You have heard me talk about this book, and I have sung its praises since picking it up. It is very short, but it moves so quickly, and it was so interesting right from the beginning. I talked about the opening of Queens of Renthia, and if you can find a sample, check it out, because you'll probably be hooked pretty quickly. The same can be said of this one. As soon as I read the prologue, I was engrossed in this story, in this character's plot, in this world. I wanted to know more. I wanted to know what was going to happen. And it's just a little glimpse of what the actual plot is going to be. The setup is that you follow somebody who is a god killer, and there are many gods in this world, and their relationship to human beings is pretty much at the lowest point it could be, because there have been previous wars where the gods battled each other and humans were caught in the middle, and humans did ally themselves with certain gods, but then they very much felt that they would be betrayed, or that they were currently being betrayed, and so they ended up finding the gods also. And so now you're trying to have people like god killers stamp out the remaining gods that are still left, and that is where our main character comes into the picture. And then her life becomes intertwined with a young girl's who impossibly has a small god bonded to her, and she is trying to be rid of this bond, not because she doesn't like the god, because she actually is very close to it, but because it actually physically harms them when they try to go too far from one another. It's making her life pretty much impossible to live. And the main character does not like this god, but she doesn't like any gods, and you see why at the beginning, and she very much has a chip on her shoulder. I very often describe this as feeling like if you loved the relationship between Geralt and Ciri and you wished that the Witcher book series was more of that, that's what you're going to get with Godkiller. So much fun, action-packed, awesome world. I can't recommend it enough. It was such a good time. After that, we have a book that I just recently reread, and I have had such a good time with it, and that would be the Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. So I've always said that it starts out just a tiny bit, not necessarily slow, but a bit introductory. You're getting to know Kel, you're getting to know the world and the parallel Londons, and you're getting to understand why Black London is closed off to the others. What's an Antari? How does the magic work? You're getting introduced to that at the beginning, but then once the plot really moves forward, it does not stop until the end of the book. It just flies by. The second book is much more reflective. You're really sitting with the characters as they're processing everything that happened in the first book. But even though that would make it seem as though it would take a little bit to get through, I read the whole thing in a sitting. I just had such a good time with it. And then the third one picks up immediately and it just goes. So this trilogy, I think, has just fantastic pacing all around. The writing, I find V.E. Schwab's writing to have just such a charm to it, but also be, it sounds kind of goofy to say, but it's very readable. It's very, like, compulsively readable. You just don't want to stop. There's nothing that you have to sit with and be like, wait, what is she trying to say here? And that doesn't mean that she's not poetic at times or that she doesn't have interesting ways of describing things. She just always can move the story. And I just find Shades to be, it's fun. I care about the characters. The stakes become very high. Sometimes when you are having more reflective moments, you get a hint here and there about something dark and sinister lurking, and you're like, uh-oh. And so that's kind of always in the back of your mind. You're like, when is this gonna happen? When's this gonna happen? It keeps you on the edge of your seat. And so it's fast-paced in a different way throughout the entirety of the trilogy, but fast-paced nonetheless. And then I do have one that is technically young adult, but in my review for it and in talking about it in a new fantasy releases wrap-up, I did kind of hit the point that I could see a lot of adult readers enjoying this one because the world is so cool and the world building is done really well, and that would be Bonesmith by Nikki Palpretto. So even though this one is young adult, it actually is what kind of inspired this video, because after I read this, I was like, I had such a good time with it, and I wanted to think of other books that made me have a similar feeling to what this one had in regards to the pacing. So if you haven't seen my review for it, or if you didn't see me talk about it previously, this one follows a young woman named Ren who is determined to become a bonesmith, and specifically a Valkyrie, and these are the warriors within the bonesmiths. Each different kind of affinity of magic has different groups within them. So you have the warrior types, you have the ones that are more essential to the way that magic is connected and bonded to them. Then you have the individuals that forge things and make weapons and armor and such things. So you have this character who, she does have some magic to do with bones, but she is also trained in fighting. And some things go wrong at the very beginning. She's sabotaged a little bit in her efforts to become a Valkyrie. So now she's at this boring post and doesn't think that she's gonna really enjoy her time there. But then some things happen regarding a prince, and she goes on this rescue mission, and the person that she has to ally herself with is someone who seems like they were a part of the kidnapping, and so they're very much enemies, but they have to work together for a common goal. And just the way that the world is done, I hit that initially when I was talking about this. The world is so cool. The magic is awesome. I loved getting to hear all of the, not just important world building details, but all of the little details, and the way that they have command over armor and their weapons. It made the action scenes so cool. I could picture everything, and I'm like, oh, this just needs to be, and I need this to be animated like Castlevania is animated, because I'm like, this would be such an amazing animated show. Because I'm sure if you've seen Castlevania, you know, like Trevor with his whip and the way that you see it in the animation, it's so awesome. And I feel like that's the same for this as well. So if you're looking for something cool and edgy and fun and fast-paced, Bonesmith definitely fits the bill. And I do think it might appeal to an older audience. So even if you're somebody who doesn't typically check out YA, you might want to check that one out. But anyway, that's it for some very fast-paced, action-packed adult fantasy, and then one young adult mixed in there. But let me know what your recommendations would be for some fast-paced, action-packed, page-turner type of books. Like I said, I'll have a companion video to this one talking about the slower, more reflective reads. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.